Here's a quick project that makes a practical and unique gift for folks of all ages. You only need a few supplies and minimum sewing skills to make one of these tags. This version has a clear window that fits a business card, or you can try one just made of fabric. You can use your home computer to print up the identifying information. With either one of these projects, you'll end up with a one-of-a-kind tag that'll set your luggage apart from others. You'll find a link to our supply list below, along with these templates that you can download. Or you can go to our website, learnhowtoquilt.com, and click on Patterns or Small Projects. You can use some of your scraps for this project, or purchase 1/8 of a yard of a print and 1/8 of a yard for the label. I printed this information on my computer with the help of freezer paper ironed to the back of the cotton fabric. But you can just use a permanent thin marker to print on your fabric, or try making the tag with the clear window. You'll need 1/8 of a yard of clear plastic for this. To add a little stiffness to the tag, I used a medium weight fusible interfacing. Now this is only fusible on one side, not both, but you can try out other materials. For example, you could use leftover batting. That's what I used in this tag. It's pretty soft, but it stiffens it up a little. You might be wondering about the measurements of these tags. You can actually make them any size, but the measurements on the template for this pattern correspond to many of the free paper piecing patterns that we have on site. And you can use those on the back to sort of make it a little bit fancier. You'll find a link to these patterns below. Ready to get started? I'll be making 2 of these simple tags so you can see the difference between using batting and interfacing. First, cut 2 pieces of fabric, one with the identifying information and one for the backing. Now, as I said earlier, some of the cutting measurements correspond to our paper piecing patterns, but if you're just making this simple tag, you can make these any size. I think these are about 3 1/4 by 5 inches. If you want to use your computer to print these labels, you'll find links below to a video with more detailed instructions. If you decide you want to write out your information using a permanent marker, then it's probably easiest if you iron your fabric onto freezer paper before you start writing. Cut a strip about 2 inches wide by 16 inches long for the strap. This is also a measurement that can vary depending on your circumstances. Press the strip in half and then open it up and press each section to the middle so that when you fold this, you'll get something that looks like this. So I've pressed all the way down on this piece and you can see. Now all I have to do is stitch about 1/8 of an inch from the edge all the way down to keep this closed. I also like to stitch on the other side, but it's not necessary. Cut the batting or your interfacing about 1/2 inch smaller in both length and width, and then center that onto the back. Now you can use 2 pieces of batting, but I think that gets a little too thick. I usually just use 1, but I usually do use 2 pieces of interfacing. Now I don't know if you can see, but there's fusible on this side. This is what's called a light fusible. It'll fuse to the fabric. It'll hold everything in place when I sew, but then it will detach later on. I've pressed these to the back to keep them in place. Sometimes I like to sew a big X to hold this in place, but it's not necessary. I like to round off these corners because I think it makes it a little bit easier when you go to turn it inside out. So just take a circular object. I've got these circle templates, but you can use any object that has a circular edge and place that up in the corner and then trace around the edge. You only have to mark the corners of one rectangle for each project. Take your straps, find the center. You can have them offset a little like this, or you can just put them on top of each other like this, personal preference. And then stitch about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Go back and forth a number of times. When stitching, you want to stay on top of the straps. If you go into the background fabric, sometimes that will pull that fabric. So to avoid that, just stay up on top of the straps. I like to pin my straps out of the way into the opening where I'll be turning this inside out. That way they won't get caught up in the seams and it eliminates some of the bulk in the center. Put right sides together and I'll pin all the way around, making sure that this is where my opening will be. Put right sides together and I'll pin on this side because that's where those markings are. Stitch with a 1/4 inch seam. Slow down your stitching when going around the curves following the drawn line. I stitched a 1/4 inch all the way around, making sure to backstitch at the end and at the beginning. Also went back and forth a few times when I went over the strap. Before turning this inside out, I like to go in and pull that pin out so I don't get stuck. And then I trim around the corners. I also like to trim that strap. When everything's been trimmed, I'm ready to turn this inside out. This one turns pretty easy. This one's a little more difficult because of the stiffness of that interfacing. Push out those corners. I like to sort of run my finger along the seam and then take it over to the ironing board and press. After pressing, you need to close these openings. You can do that by hand or top stitch around the edge. Here they are, all ready to be attached to my bag. I had some residue on my iron when I pressed this, so sorry for the marks. If I had to do this over again, I would probably put the batting up against this fabric, or I'd use a lightweight interfacing because you can sort of see through this fabric. The same fabric is used here, but I can't see through it because of that interfacing. To make this tag with the window, you'll need to make 2 units and then put those together. One will be like the tag that you just saw in the first part of this video, and the second unit will have the window. Cut 4 pieces of fabric. These rectangles should be 5 1/4 inches by 3 3/4 inches. For the first section of the tag, I'll just use 1 piece of interfacing. To cut down on bulk in the seams, this is a 1/2 inch smaller in both length and width. The strap is 2 inches by 16 inches. For the window, you'll need a piece of plastic and then 2 of these patterns printed on interfacing. Now this piece of interfacing I just ran right through my printer. If you're not sure about using your computer for printing on interfacing, you can just take a piece of interfacing, lay it over this pattern, and then trace the inside. This piece only needs to be cut to the dark black line. And you have the option of putting rounded corners on it or 90-degree corners. This first unit goes together just like the tag at the beginning of the video. Make your strap, center your interfacing, stitch your strap, put right sides together, and sew all the way around. I stitched around the edges and then I turned this inside out through this little opening, and then I pressed. I'm not going to top stitch this now. I'll do that later when I have the second piece made. I rounded the corners on this tag, but they didn't match up so well with the other unit. To ensure perfect corners, use this template for your interfacing. You can trace it like so, and then you can cut it with scissors or rotary cut it. You can see I'm not so great at tracing. You don't want to cut off this line. Or you can just run a sheet of interfacing through your printer. I pressed that interfacing to the fabric and then I got ready to sew. I stitched all the way around the outside edge and then right over the top of that drawn line. You can see that these 2 corners line up a little bit better when using this method. So you'll want to try this, especially if you're using 2 different fabrics. Cut out these 2 sections of interfacing. Make sure to cut along the dark line. Then cut out the center section. Add the interfacing to the wrong side of your fabric. Make a snip and then eyeball about 1/4 inch seam all the way around. Clip into the corner You want to be at about a 45-degree angle to that corner, and you want to cut all the way in to the interfacing. You'll need to glue or base this seam allowance back. I like to use a washable glue stick. Put glue on both the fabric and the interfacing, and then fold it back. Continue gluing until all 4 sides are secure. You can see here that I didn't cut all the way up to that edge, so I'm going to cut it a little bit more and finish gluing that. Try to get that glued in place. When everything's been glued, put right sides together, line up those inside pieces, and then clip. When everything's been lined up, take this to the sewing machine and stitch a 1/4 inch seam all the way around the edges. If you want rounded corners, make sure you stitch on this dark line. I used red thread so you can see where I stitch, but you'll want to use a matching color of thread. So clip those corners and then turn it inside out. I'd like to push in those rounded corners. After it's been turned, you want to take it to your ironing board and press. After it's been pressed, take your plastic and place it between the layers. When the plastic is in place, use clips to keep it secure. I'll take this over to my machine and stitch about 1/8 of an inch from the edge all the way around the window. And here's my completed window. Before adding this to the other piece, you want to make sure that that window is nice and clean, free of fingerprints. So you want to line up these 2 pieces, and then you'll be stitching about 1/8 of an inch all the way around the edge to secure it, making sure to leave a space about this big open so you can put a business card or identifying information in here. This is pretty thick. It's not so easy to put pins there, but you can take and clip it like so. Makes it a little bit easier. See, my corner's a little off here, but since the fabric's the same color, I don't think you'll notice that much. Maybe I can try on the other side and see if it looks a little bit better. Sometimes if you move it around, it might work out a little bit better, but I think it's going to be the same on either side. So we'll just clip this. Now, as I said earlier, this is a lot of thicknesses that you're going to have to sew through. So some people prefer to use their walking foot when sewing this, but I'm just going to use a regular foot. Don't forget that little opening where you turned it inside out. Make sure to catch this when you top stitch. And here's my completed tag. My business card fits right inside. Hope you decide to try one of these luggage tags. It's a fun way to use up your scraps, and they make great gifts. I'll be making these tags at the International Stitch Marathon occurring on July 22nd, 2022. Please join us via Zoom. You'll find more information below. Thank you for watching today. If you have any questions and/or concerns, please email me at ann@learnhowtoquilt.com or post in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Over the next few months, I'll be adding some new projects for beginners. On the second Thursday of the month, you'll get a video for a table runner that features 1 or more beginner skills. On the 4th Thursday of the month, I'll be hosting a pattern review for beginners. I've found some fun patterns, like this elephant quilt pattern, that I think you'll like. In the weeks between, I'll be giving instructions and free patterns for more easy quilts and small projects. Hope you'll join us.